Good evening. I'm Gordon Peterkin, not appearing tonight as your garden editor, but as a friend of tonight's special guest, Robert Morris. Bob Morris is a 28-year resident of Madison. He lives here with his wife. His two daughters grew up here, but he is also a professional artist and teaches art at the University of Bridgeport. He recently had a one-man show here in Madison, but now these paintings have been shipped off to Victoria, Texas, where they're going to be shown in the Nave Museum. So in case you weren't lucky enough to see his show while he had it here in Madison, I want you to have an opportunity to see those shows with us tonight, but particularly to meet the artist himself. Bob, I've never seen anything quite like the paintings that you have here today, except I guess I do recognize a couple of other painters a little bit. These icebergs you have in so many of your paintings, were they influenced by Frederick Church, perhaps?
Yes, they were. Very good of you to recognize that. Yeah, they are. They're actually, some of them are icebergs by Frederick Church, and others are just icebergs that probably end up looking like Frederick Church.
How did you happen to be intrigued by those icebergs?
Well, as you probably realize, it's very difficult to see icebergs. Very few people have seen them. There aren't even very many photographs of them, so that the work of 19th century painters who went to the Antarctic tend to be the things that one associates with icebergs.
Oh, so they went around the world scouting for icebergs, amongst other things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, they would go off on expeditions, and then they would be reproduced and distributed and bought in this country, and people would look at them. And they're just gorgeous things to look at. I understand that the colors are pretty fantastic, that they have colors that you wouldn't expect to be in a large amount of ice, like greens and blues and things of that sort, which come from, I think, trace elements that are found in them. Then their convolutions are very gorgeous, and they have caves and sculptural forms, and in fact, they've even been compared to cathedrals.
Well, now you're very persuasive. I wouldn't have thought of the appeal of icebergs because as a layman, one thinks of, oh, maybe a ship is going to be sunk by one.
Well, I understand they can be rather dangerous, as a matter of fact. When they calve, which means when they're born, when they break off from a glacier and fall in the ocean, apparently they disappear for a few minutes and then pop up in unexpected places.
Oh my gosh.
You're not supposed to be anywhere near the scene when they do something like that. And they make enormous noises. And they come in different, if I may continue a little bit, they come in various sizes and shapes. So some of them are 50 miles long.
Well, now, I'm going to have to look around the next time I'm in iceberg country. But I must say then another painter whose work I do see as influencing yours, particularly by this painting behind us, is the work of Thomas Akins, and he was a Philadelphia artist in the late 19th and early 20th century. And I was born and brought up in the Philadelphia area and used to commute back and forth to college along the Schuylkill River where there were people sculling. And so I've always been very fond of Akins, and I must say that you sold me quite a bit just by being influenced by Akins. Now, how did you happen to be influenced?
Well, he's hard not to be influenced by. He's, I would guess that most painters like Akins. I mean, he's very thoughtful. He's interested in the things that most painters are interested in, that is how things work, how bodies look, how reflections work, perspective. And he works with very simple means, too. I mean, they weren't overblown or complicated paintings. They were nice, straightforward, beautifully painted, very crisp and sure, and they've held their beauty all these years. I mean, they're still worth looking at.
Well, and Akins, as I understand it, was really quite precise about his paintings, wasn't he?
Oh, very much.
Drawing, doing sketches in advance, showing perspectives and so on.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, he was, I think, one of the great pioneers in technical perspective and anatomy, studying the human body, and the anatomy of animals, too. In fact, he would use photography to show how horses would trot and gallop and, the various movements of the parts of the body of animals and human beings. And it would come up in his paintings.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can certainly understand how that appealed to you. Now, one more thing I have to ask you about. Here in your one-man show, you have quite a group of paintings which seem to sort of take off from the one behind us here. Not reproductions of this by any means, but paintings which have many of the same elements. Do you consciously paint putting certain things in your pictures? Do you have certain stylistic elements that you feel belong in your paintings, or how do you go from one painting to another in a series?
Well, I do it, I suppose, the way many people do it. That is, I start with one thing, and I started with the premise of the iceberg on water. And so I just did a whole series of icebergs on water. I mean, that was the first step in actually getting them going. And I painted them fairly completely, but they were very simple. And then I'd look at them and try to figure out what would the next step be. What could I imagine could happen on the iceberg or in the water around the iceberg? And then I would add something to it, and that would generate another idea. And it was just an accretion, a building from the iceberg itself outward. And as I do it with one painting, I suppose it would generate an idea that might spread to the next painting. And so that one idea was the use of architecture on the iceberg. And so I put up a high-rise building, I can't remember which was the first one, and it looked pretty good. And so I tried it on a few others, and they looked even better, and I got a little bit more experience in the construction of the buildings on the icebergs. And as I did that, it would give me another idea for a reflection in the water, let's say, of that building. I would put the reflection in the water. If it worked out, I would spread that. So it was a matter of starting with something simple and letting it just build.
So I got the impression that your work as an artist maybe is something like the work of a composer, as a musician.
Yeah, I think you could probably say that. The way I understand composers' work, at least the ones that I've talked to, is that they'll start with some of them actually start with rhythms first, instead of starting with a melody. They'll actually work out a whole set of rhythms for the length of the composition, and the arithmetic that goes with that at the time. And then they might decide upon a key signature, and then they'll develop the tonal aspects within that. So it's like doing it's like doing a building. It's working out starting with a module, let's say, a certain size that you like, and then building it from that. And that's what I've done. It's a module. You start with the iceberg and build.
Well, that's very interesting, because I have to admit that I've never really thought about how an artist works. One who is not an artist tends to think, okay, there's a scene and the artist paints it more or less faithfully. And you're saying, well, really it isn't that kind of process. It's sort of an evolution of ideas.
It's an accretion, it's an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make mistakes, obviously. You can try something out that just doesn't work, so that you have to take it out and start over again. Or even the mistake might suggest another solution in a different direction, and then you'll go back and retrace your steps and move off in that direction.
Well, I'm going to look at paintings differently, I think, as a result of this conversation. But I must say, one of the things that I'm going to be looking for, or several of the things I'm going to be looking for to see whether the artist has a sense of humor, which obviously you have. These spans of the bridge don't quite meet at the top, but apparently that was quite intentional.
One of the luxuries that you have as a painter, as opposed to being an architect or an engineer or a bridge designer, is that things don't actually have to work. I was reminded this past week of the Williamsburg Bridge being closed in New York because it's rusting out, something's going wrong with it, and the Coliseum in New Haven having difficulties. But you see, I can have fun with that. They don't actually have to come together. I mean, you can make certain modifications, and it could be because of several reasons. I mean, that are very physical. One, that maybe the icebergs are melting unevenly, and so therefore it's difficult from an engineering standpoint to make them come together. Or maybe they've made a huge error in their arithmetic, so that it's something like that. Or they did a very poor survey, or it's the currents are making them drift apart, or etc. Now, I think that's the benefit of art as opposed to science. I mean, we can make things happen that defy gravity or defy scientific knowledge.
And then one doesn't expect to see a building sitting in an iceberg, and so I'm going to be looking for elements of surprise, I think. And then I'm going to be looking for grace, and some grace that rises from precision, which I see in your paintings, and it seems to me that's something that's very valuable.
Well, I like crisp things. I like hard edges. I like neat paintings. I just like them to be crisp and well defined and not sloppy. And I guess I get a little bit of that from Akins too, because he was a good craftsman and he put the paint on very well and he made sure that they lasted a long time. And I think that's part of the painter's responsibility.
So a painting then ought to tell you something about the kind of person the painter is,
Oh,
as
sure.
well as about what it is he's painting.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks ever so much, Bob.
Very welcome, Gordon. It's a pleasure.
So, Bob, thanks again. It's awfully good of you to invite us here to your home, and good of you also to give us an intimate view of yourself as an artist, as well as sharing with us your fascinating paintings.